Hello again, and welcome back to the Night Reader. Wherever you are, I hope you're safe, warm, and listening in the quiet. If you're new, I invite you to subscribe and let me know in the comments where in the world you are and how late the night found you. I always love seeing how far our stories reach. Now, dim the lights, pull your blanket close, and breathe slowly. Let's begin. The police stopped searching by the end of the week. No leads, no suspects, no evidence of foul play, they said. Just a missing kid and a pair of old shoes near the marsh. Sheriff Gilly told my mom it wasn't unusual for teenagers to run off, that they get ideas, want to escape their little towns and come back once they've gotten the wild out of their system. But Henry wasn't like that. He didn't run, not from anything, and especially not without telling me. Mom stopped talking after the 5th day. She moved like a ghost around the house, never looking me in the eye. At night, I'd hear her crying quietly through the walls, but she never came to my room, never held me, never asked what I knew. And I think, deep down, she didn't want to know, because I had seen something I couldn't explain. On the night he disappeared, I woke up to the sound of the screen creaking open. I didn't get out of bed right away. I was too tired. But I remember the sound clearly. And when I did finally check the window, I saw only the curtain, flapping gently in the breeze. Henry was gone, and out beyond the grass, the lantern was burning again, brighter than ever, and closer. The next morning, there were muddy footprints on the floorboards beneath the window. Long, narrow, not like Henry's. Something had come in, or waited. No one believed me, of course. I didn't even try to tell them. There's something about the marsh, about Weatherby itself, that makes people not ask. The neighbors stopped visiting. No casseroles, no sympathy cards, just empty looks and tighter locks at night. The town knew. They always had. But none of them spoke it aloud. And I was alone now. 2 days after the search ended, a box showed up on our front step. No postage, no label, just a plain brown parcel, tied with waxy string. Mom didn't touch it. She left it sitting there until nightfall, then finally opened the door, took it in, and set it on the kitchen table like it was radioactive. She didn't say a word, just opened the flap slowly, cautiously. Inside was a single object, a bell, old, bronze, the kind you'd find in a church, only smaller. Hand-held, with a loop of wood at the top, tarnished and streaked with something dark. Mom stared at it for a long time. Then she picked it up, walked out the back door, and threw it into the marsh. Not a word. I watched her from the hallway, not daring to step into the kitchen. Her shoulders were shaking, her fingers pale and trembling, even after the bell was gone. And when she came back inside, her eyes looked hollow. That was the last night she spoke to me. She took to her bed the next day, didn't eat, didn't get up, just lay there, eyes fixed on the ceiling, lips moving slightly like she was praying, or whispering to someone I couldn't see. I tried to call for help. The phone didn't work. Not even the dial tone. I walked all the way into town to the post office, the only public phone left in Weatherby, and Sheriff Gilly promised to come check in. But he never showed. The next night, I saw the lantern again. This time it wasn't alone. There were 3, moving together, slowly across the marsh like floating stars. My breath caught as I pressed my face to the glass. They hovered just past the trees, then stilled. Each light suspended above the reeds, almost forming a triangle. And then they rang, not loudly, but the air shimmered, a dull, distant chime like metal striking something hollow. The same tone I'd heard in my dreams since Henry disappeared. I backed away from the window, heart hammering. The bell. The one Mom threw into the marsh. I crept down the hallway to her bedroom, unsure if I wanted to wake her. But the door was already open, a crack. I pushed gently. She was gone. No sheets, no shoes. Just the faint impression of her body on the mattress and muddy footprints leading to the window, now open wide to the night. I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the hallway with my knees pulled to my chest, flashlight in hand, waiting for something, anything, to explain this. But nothing came. No sound, no movement, just the lanterns flickering out one by one, and the darkness swallowing the house. I thought about leaving, about packing a bag, walking until I hit a road with lights, people, anything but this place. But Weatherby doesn't let go so easy, and I knew, deep down, that running wouldn't help. Because wherever the lantern man walked, he wasn't tied to a place. He was tied to us, to me. And something had been passed down. From Henry, from Mom, something unfinished. That night, I dreamed of the marsh again. This time the sky was full of lights, dozens of lanterns drifting silently above the water, each casting a long shadow below. And beneath them, figures, half seen, tall, thin, wrapped in cloth that writhed like smoke. They stood in a circle around something, a hole, wide, black, breathing. I stepped closer, against my will. Inside the hole I saw eyes, hundreds of them, staring up at me. And then a bell rang, loud and clear, and the whole world tilted. I woke gasping, drenched in sweat. The smell of the marsh clung to the air. And in the hallway, muddy footprints led from my room to the back door, where it stood ajar, waiting. I didn't step outside that morning. I couldn't. The door was open, yes, but the footprints ended just beyond the threshold. Like whatever, had come in during the night had disappeared into the air or back into the marsh without leaving a trace. I shut the door gently, locked it, then I locked it again. All morning I paced the house, flashlight in one hand, the old radio from the garage in the other. No signal, nothing but faint static, like wind moving through water. I cranked the dial slowly, AM/FM emergency bands. All of it was dead. At one point I heard someone call my name, a voice low and distant, drifting through the vent in the floor. I dropped the radio. I don't know how long I sat on the kitchen floor after that, arms wrapped around my knees, staring at the metal vent. The voice never came again, but the quiet felt thick now, too quiet. Later that afternoon I found something new, another box, same brown paper, same waxy string, sitting right at the foot of the basement door. This one had no bell, just a photograph, old, curled at the corners, black and white. I recognized the house, our house, but it wasn't how it looks now. No peeling paint, no rotting porch beams. It looked new. Behind it stood the marsh, or what would become the marsh, still dry and wild with tall pine. And in front of the house, 3 people, a man in a wide-brimmed hat, a woman in a black dress holding a lantern, and a boy, maybe 10 years old, with a bell in his hand. They weren't smiling, none of them. But their eyes knew something. I flipped the photo over. In faded ink, 3 words were written on the back, the first ringing. I dropped it and backed away, every hair on my arms rising. I'd never seen that photo before, never seen those people. But the boy's face, it looked like Henry, or someone he could have been, in another time. That night I tried to stay awake. I made tea, sat in the living room with every light on, read books, anything to avoid sleep. But sometime around 2 a.m., I must have drifted off. I woke to the sound of footsteps in the attic. Not rats, not the creak of old wood. Footsteps, measured, slow, circling overhead. I sat frozen in the chair, ears straining, every muscle tight as a wire. The steps went on for nearly 5 minutes, then stopped directly above me. Silence. Then, 3 knocks. I bolted from the chair and ran into the hallway. The attic door, the one built into the ceiling above the staircase, was ajar. Just an inch, but enough to see darkness behind it, thick and waiting. I didn't climb the stairs. I didn't even breathe. Just stared up at the crack in the ceiling and listened. Nothing. I turned to go back into the living room and stopped. There was a new photograph on the floor. Same size, same paper. This time, the image showed the attic door, open, and something peering out of it. A face. Just a sliver of it, obscured by shadow. But the eyes were clear, bright, empty, familiar. The back of this photo read, "Ring once, and he comes. Ring twice, and he listens. Ring thrice, and he remembers." I dropped it. When I looked back up at the attic, the door was shut. No sound, no light. But I knew it had been open. The next morning I left the house, not far, just into the edge of the marsh. I had to see it again, see if anything had changed. Maybe find the bell Mom threw away. It wasn't hard to find the spot. The reeds had been flattened, like something large had been pacing there. And in the middle of the clearing, the bell. Not rusted, not wet. It looked new now, gleaming, even in the mist. I picked it up. The moment I did, the trees shifted around me. The wind went still. Even the birds stopped calling. And from somewhere deeper in the marsh, a voice whispered my name. I dropped the bell and ran. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch with a kitchen knife and a flashlight, watching the tree line. At exactly 3:12 a.m., the lanterns appeared again. 5 this time. And they moved differently, faster, closer. As they reached the edge of the clearing, I could see something just beyond the glow. A figure, tall and thin, walking between them like a shepherd herding stars. I couldn't see his face, only the outline of his coat. Long, tattered, and a hat pulled low over where his eyes should have been. He stopped at the edge of the trees, lifted his hand, and pointed to the house. My breath caught. The lights blinked out, one by one, until I was staring into nothing. But the bell was in my hand now, and the note from the attic photo echoed in my mind. Ring once, and he comes. Ring twice, and he listens. Ring thrice, and he remembers. I didn't ring it. Not that night, but I knew I'd have to. Soon. I woke up with the bell still in my hand, fingers clenched so tight around it that the edge had left a raw red ring in my palm. My mouth was dry. The fire had long since gone out. The sky beyond the windows had shifted to that strange blue-gray color it always takes just before dawn, the hour when nothing feels real. The house felt different. Colder, yes, but not just temperature. The air was wrong, dense, quiet in a way that made your ears ache, like something was pressing in from the outside. I walked room to room without turning on any lights, just the bell in my right hand and the flashlight in my left. Every window I passed, I checked the marsh, still, empty. But the moment I reached the kitchen, I froze. Someone had lit a candle on the counter, a single black taper in a small iron holder, the kind we'd never owned. No scent, no wax trail, no matches nearby, just flame, flickering, waiting. I didn't touch it. I just stood there and stared. The candle wasn't the only thing new. Sitting beside it was a third photograph. Same size, same paper. But this one was of me, standing in the hallway from the back, holding the bell. In the photo I was turning, head just starting to look over my shoulder, mouth slightly open, as if I was about to speak. But I hadn't. Not that I remembered. I flipped it over. No message this time. Just a date. And a time. Tonight. Midnight. I tore it in half. Then I picked up the bell and went back to the attic. I don't know why. Some part of me thought, maybe, whatever was happening had an origin point. Something old, buried, hidden above our heads. Maybe if I could understand what was in the attic, I could stop it before it reached Henry, or my mother. The attic stairs groaned beneath me. The trap door was open again, not wide, just an inch or two, enough to see that thick velvet dark. I lifted it slowly. The old hinges moaned, but didn't break. The light from my flashlight cut through the dust in a narrow cone. The beam landed on the floorboards, long untouched, and the far corner of the attic where a pile of old boxes had been stacked since before we moved in. They were gone now. Only dust rings and footprints remained, and not just one set, many. Bare feet, by the look of it. Some large, some impossibly small, all leading to the wall in the back, where the wood looked warped and rotted. I moved closer, and found a door. No handle, no hinges, just a seam in the wood, barely visible unless you were looking for it. My hand reached out on its own. Before I touched it, something behind the door knocked. Once, twice, 3 times. I nearly fell down the attic stairs. By the time I reached the hallway, heart hammering, breath catching, the trap door was shut again. But the bell was gone. It had been in my hand. Now, nothing. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat in the living room with every lamp lit, fire blazing, old wind-up clock ticking loud in the silence. I watched the minutes crawl. At 11:59, the fire went out, all at once. No flicker, no smoke. Just a sudden and absolute extinguishing. The lamps followed. Click, 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 until only the clock ticked. I reached for the flashlight. It wouldn't turn on. The batteries weren't dead. I'd checked them an hour ago, replaced them even. Still nothing. The house swallowed me in dark. Then the front door opened. Not a creak. Not a bang. Just a calm, deliberate swing. I stood frozen, breath locked in my chest. Outside, the fog had returned, thick as cotton, swirling around the porch like it had weight. And in the middle of it, a shape. Human. Tall. Wearing that same long coat and wide-brimmed hat. The lantern man. He didn't move, didn't speak, but something shifted in the fog around him. A dozen small lights began to glow behind his silhouette. Lanterns, carried by invisible hands. And beneath the glow of those lights were faces. Children, their eyes empty, skin pale and wet. And in their hands, each one, they held a bell, rusted, bent, but identical to the one I'd lost. The man raised his hand, and the bells rang. Once, twice, thrice. The sound tore through me like a memory I never had. Images flashed. A dark room, hands gripping mine, a scream caught in someone else's throat. Water, lanterns bobbing, a circle of figures chanting names I didn't recognize. And then, I was on the floor, back in the living room, alone, clock still ticking, the door shut, and in my lap, the bell. It was warm. I didn't sleep again after that, and neither did Henry. He came into my room around dawn, face pale, eyes wide. "I saw him," he whispered. "Who?" "The man with the light. He was in the hallway. He asked me where the bell was." I pulled him into a hug, tried to keep my voice steady. "What did you say?" Henry hesitated. "I told him it was your turn now." I held him tighter. Neither of us said another word, but something was shifting. The marsh looked different that morning, less like a place and more like a mouth, wide and waiting. The trees along the edge bent inward like ribs, and in the water, something floated. Not a log, a figure, wrapped in cloth, drifting just beneath the surface. I didn't call the police. I don't know why. Maybe because I already knew they wouldn't come. Instead, I went to the old barn at the back of the property, the one we'd never used. It had been padlocked since we moved in. Keys long lost. But the lock was broken now. Inside, I found rows of crates stacked from floor to ceiling, all sealed, all marked with the same emblem, a lantern inside a circle. I opened the closest one. Inside were bells, dozens, hundreds, each one wrapped in a piece of black cloth and tied with twine, and beneath them, a book, bound in leather, unlabeled. I opened it carefully. Inside were names, hundreds of them, dates, locations, and beside each, a symbol, either a flame or a bell. Some names had both, some had neither. On the last page, I found my name. No date, no location, just a single mark beside it. A bell, and beneath it, one more name, Henry, and beside his, a flame. I stood in the barn long after the daylight had given out. The only light came from the open door, a silver haze spilling in from a moon that looked far too full for the calendar date. My eyes were locked on the page, on those two names, mine, with a bell, and Henry's, marked by a flame. The symbols pulsed in my head like a migraine. I couldn't look away. I didn't want to blink. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes, maybe hours. The barn was silent except for the whisper of wind moving through the cracks in the wood. But I kept waiting for something to happen, for the bells around me to ring on their own, or the book to shift, or that voice to speak again. The one I hadn't heard aloud, but could feel in my spine since the marsh took its first breath the night we moved in. Eventually I stood. The book trembled in my hands. Not from the cold, but from something else. Recognition. Not memory exactly, but a deep, marrow-deep certainty that I'd seen this before. Maybe not in this lifetime, maybe not even in a dream, but the symbols, the pages, the sense of ceremony, it was too precise to be new. I tucked the book under my arm and left the barn, locked it behind me, not that it would help, and walked back toward the house, trying not to look at the marsh, trying not to hear the soft, wet sounds that moved through the grass like something dragging itself toward me just below the surface of sight. When I reached the porch, I turned to look back one last time. The barn was dark now, but the windows glowed with faint orange light, like lanterns. I didn't tell Henry. He was in the kitchen when I came in, building a tower out of cereal boxes and half-finished homework. He didn't ask where I'd been, and I didn't offer. I just watched him, his two small hands stacking and reshaping, as if the act of building could hold off whatever thing was clawing its way into our lives. There was something different in his face, a stillness that didn't belong on a child. His eyes tracked too slowly, his breathing too steady. It wasn't sleep deprivation, it wasn't fear, it was preparation. As if something in him already knew what was coming and had accepted it. I asked him if he was feeling okay. He didn't answer, just nodded toward the window. And then I saw it. On the glass. A handprint. Small. Damp. Pressed from the outside. The wind hadn't howled all night. There'd been no storm, no rain, but the glass was wet now. And the fingers of the print were too long. I opened the door, stepped out into the cold. My breath fogged in the air. The porch creaked beneath me. Nothing was there, just marsh. But the fog had returned, thicker than before, writhing, living. It wrapped around the edge of the porch like a tide, and I could see shapes in it again. Figures, faces, children. Some still had their lanterns, others carried bells. All were watching. None of them blinked. I backed into the house, locked the door behind me, and pulled the curtains closed. That night I tried to read the book, not just skim it, really read it. The names were written in the same tight calligraphic script as the letters I'd received. Pages bled with ink drawings, crude circles etched into the ground, rows of people in hoods, an open marsh lit by rows of flame. Some pages had only a single sentence. One read, "The bells are to remember. The flames are to erase." Another, "Do not light the lantern unless the child consents. The bell alone cannot summon, but it can wake." And this, "If you bury the bell, the water will rise. If you ring it, the door will open." I don't know what they meant. Not fully. But the more I read, the more the book seemed to change. Pages that had been blank filled in as I read. The ink bloomed slowly, like blood in water. I flipped back to the final entry, the one with my name, and found a new line below it. Task accepted. And then, beneath Henry's name, the flame flickered, just once, and vanished. I dropped the book, It hit the floor with a thud louder than its weight should have allowed. The lights in the room dimmed. I heard footsteps upstairs. And then, I swear it, I heard my own voice from the attic. "It's your turn now." I ran up the stairs 2 at a time. The attic door was open again. The hallway was colder than the air outside. Henry was standing at the top of the steps, facing the trap door. His hand was outstretched, reaching for the rope that had appeared, hanging from the ceiling like it had grown there overnight. I grabbed his shoulder. He looked back at me slowly. "It's okay," he whispered. "He said you already rang it once." "Who?" But I knew. I pulled him back, slammed the attic door shut, and dragged the dresser in front of it. My breath was ragged. My skin was ice. He didn't fight me, just sat on the floor, quiet. "I dreamed of the water," he said. "It's full of bells." And then he looked up at me with eyes that were not entirely his own. "And they remember you." I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in Henry's room, sitting against the door, with the book on my lap and the bell in my hand. At some point, the silence deepened. Not the silence of the house, not the pause before a storm. A different silence, one that felt imposed, like a glass dome dropped over everything, muting the world. I stood, walked to the window, and saw the marsh. It was on fire, no smoke, no heat, just flames hovering a few inches above the water, hundreds of them, lanterns, burning in place, and standing between them facing the house, the lantern man. His coat billowed in wind I couldn't feel. His hand was raised, and though the flames cast no shadow, I could see his face now. Empty, hollow, not like a mask, like a vessel, waiting to be filled. And then, the bell in my hand rang. I didn't shake it. No one touched it. It rang once, and the flames in the marsh went out. All at once, darkness swallowed the water, and then the doorbell rang. I didn't want to answer it, but I already knew I would. I stood in the hallway for what felt like hours, the bell still in my hand, the cold metal sweating against my skin. I didn't move, not even when the chime of the doorbell faded and the silence pressed in again. It wasn't the kind of silence you could trust. It felt like something crouched just beyond the threshold, listening, breathing, waiting for the tremble in your breath to signal weakness. And I swear, I heard it, just beyond the frame of the door, a second breath, soft and slow, as if someone else was holding their breath too, mimicking me, daring me to exhale first. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to take Henry, grab the car keys, and drive until the gas ran out, past the marsh, past the town, into whatever dark emptiness might still exist without memory or names or bells. But I knew what I would find if I opened the door. I knew, even before my hand touched the knob, there would be no one there. And I was right. The porch was empty. The night stretched out, wide and suffocating. The fog had retreated slightly, but still clung to the grass like something afraid to let go. I stepped outside, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched from inside the house now. The stillness behind me felt wrong, like the walls themselves had shifted while I wasn't looking, like the air indoors had rearranged itself in anticipation of something. I looked down. At my feet was a box. It hadn't been there seconds ago. Of that I was sure. Wrapped in stained linen, tied with a single strand of red thread that reminded me of surgical sutures. It didn't bear my name, nor Henry's. It didn't need to. I picked it up. It was lighter than it should have been, and warmer too, like it had been resting on skin, not wood. I unwrapped it slowly, expecting something grotesque, some fragment of whatever creature stalked the marsh, some relic meant to frighten or punish. But it was something far worse. It was a photograph, black and white, blurry, old. It showed the house, our house, But there was no marsh behind it, just open fields and a dirt road. The fence looked new, and the barn behind it stood straighter than it did now. In the photograph, children played in the yard, 5 of them. And one man stood in the doorway, tall, expressionless, dressed in a dark coat. He was holding a lantern. My breath caught in my throat, because I recognized one of the children. It was Henry. You might think I'm mistaken, that it was just a boy who looked like him. But no, it was him. Down to the shape of his jaw, the way his right foot turned slightly inward, the small scar near his temple that he got falling off the monkey bars in 2nd grade. This wasn't just a resemblance. It was a memory captured by a camera that should not have existed. And it was taken before I was born. My hands shook. I flipped the photo over. There was writing on the back in the same hand that marked the book. Not all loops are broken. Some rings must echo. I wanted to scream, to tear the photo in half, to run upstairs and hold my son, and refuse to let the world outside in for even one more moment. But then I heard something that pulled me away from panic and toward a much colder, heavier kind of fear. It was Henry's voice, from behind the barn. I dropped the photo, ran. The air was thicker now, heavy with a smell I couldn't place, earth and rot and something metallic, like rusted iron left too long in water. The grass clung to my legs, soaked in dew or something worse. The barn loomed ahead, dark and silent. And there, at the back corner, stood Henry, alone, staring at something I couldn't see. I called his name. He didn't turn. I reached him in seconds, grabbed his shoulder. He was ice cold to the touch. He pointed. Beyond the fence where the marsh should have been stood a figure. Not the lantern man, at least not as I had seen him before. This one was hunched, shrouded in something that seemed to shift shape as it moved. Its face was obscured by what looked like a mask made of reeds and candle wax, melting slowly despite the cold. Its hands hung long and limp, like ropes, brushing the ground. It was standing ankle-deep in water. And behind it, the marsh was gone. In its place was a church, old, broken, and half-submerged. Just the spire remained above the black water. A bell tower, crooked and silent. Henry whispered, "That's where the names are kept." I turned to him. "What do you mean?" But he was already walking toward the water. I pulled him back hard. He didn't fight me, but he didn't flinch either. His eyes stayed locked on the figure, as if it had asked him a question and he hadn't answered yet. We returned to the house. I double-locked the doors, pushed furniture in front of the windows, sat him down and made him drink something warm, though he didn't seem to notice. He wasn't shivering anymore, and that scared me more than anything. Children are supposed to shiver when they're wet and cold and terrified. But he wasn't afraid. He looked resolved. And then he told me something that made my blood run dry. "They said the bell keeps ringing because someone answered it once." He paused as if choosing the right words. "But not you. You didn't ring it first." I didn't understand. Then who did? And he looked at me with eyes that weren't a child's anymore. I think I did. He doesn't remember when, or how, or why. But the house does, and the land does. The bell does. He said it felt like a game at first, like hide and seek. He remembered playing near the barn, finding a rope buried in the dirt, pulling it, hearing something distant and hollow toll far below his feet. He thought it was pretend. But some bells don't care if you meant it. Some doors stay open, especially the ones buried in water. That night, I watched him sleep, afraid to leave his side. I placed the bell beside his bed, not because I thought it would protect him, but because I needed to know if it moved again, if it rang, if it disappeared. At some point during the night, I dozed off. I woke just before dawn, and the bell was gone. Not stolen, not hidden. Gone. as if it had never been there at all. But in its place, laid across Henry's chest, was something new. A rope, wet, frayed, and still warm. At first, I couldn't move. My eyes were open, but my body refused to follow. It wasn't sleep paralysis. This was something older, deeper, like the body recognizing that movement meant acknowledgement, and acknowledgement meant being seen. I stared at the rope lying across Henry's chest, the way it curled gently like a sleeping thing, the way its frayed end was damp and glistening, as though it had been dragged from the belly of the marsh itself and left there, delicately, like an offering. I watched the rise and fall of Henry's chest beneath it, slow and even. He hadn't stirred. He looked peaceful, almost too much so. That terrified me. Peace wasn't natural here. Not anymore. When I finally reached out, it wasn't to move the rope. I don't know why. I was afraid to touch it. Instead, I leaned in and gently eased it off him with the edge of the blanket, careful not to let my fingers graze the fibers. It fell to the floor with a muffled thump, as if it carried more weight than it should have. I left it there. For hours, Henry didn't remember anything when he woke up. Not the rope. Not the dream. Not the church half sunken in the marsh. But the photograph was still on the kitchen table. The man with the lantern still stood in the doorway, his face still a smudge of absence. And Henry's face was still there among the children, smiling. I didn't take him to school that day. I didn't even tell the school he wouldn't be there. I turned my phone off, closed every curtain, boiled water just to have something warm in the air. And then I sat down and tried to make sense of everything, writing it out in a notebook I'd found in the drawer where we used to keep crayons and loose batteries and half-used candles. I wrote about the bell, the figure, the church, the loop. And I started to see something I hadn't before. Not a story, not a haunting, but a ritual, a pattern. Something that didn't need belief to survive, only memory, only repetition. That night, the fog came back heavier than ever. It pressed against the windows like breath. The house creaked in long, drawn-out moans that didn't match the rhythm of the wind. And I started to hear a new sound, one that hadn't been there before. Scraping. Soft, but deliberate. Like someone dragging something along the outside wall. I followed the noise with slow, careful steps, flashlight in hand, every instinct in my body begging me to stop. But I didn't. I crept from room to room until I reached the back door, the one that opened toward the marsh. I paused there, listening. The scraping stopped. And in the silence that followed, something knocked. Once. Not on the door. On the glass. I turned the flashlight on and saw her, the woman from the photo. Older now, impossibly so. Her hair was long and white, her skin gray and translucent like paper soaked in water. She pressed her face to the window. Her mouth didn't move, but her eyes did, jerking upward, pointing behind me. I spun around. The rope. It was there again, coiled neatly in the middle of the hallway, just beyond where Henry slept. I ran, grabbed it without thinking, without gloves, without any thought but fear. It felt warm, pulsing. I threw it outside, slammed the door shut, bolted it, but by the time I turned around, the woman was gone, and the photo had changed. There were 6 children now. 6. The new one stood near the edge of the frame, his face blurry, unfinished. But I knew. I knew it was the boy next door, the one who'd gone missing last summer, the one they never found, the one who played by the marsh, sometimes when his father was drinking and his mother pretended not to see. I don't know how I slept. I don't know when. But I woke sometime around 3 a.m. to the sound of the bell ringing, faint and distant, from beneath the floor. This time, it rang 13 times. Slow, deliberate tolls that vibrated in the walls. And after the last one, Something changed. The house settled. Or perhaps it exhaled. There's no other way to describe it. The pressure I hadn't noticed before, the invisible weight pressing on everything, lifted just slightly, like something had finished watching or waiting. The next day I found Henry outside. I hadn't even heard him leave. He stood at the edge of the marsh, staring into the water. I called his name 3 times before he turned. When he did, he was holding something, a book, bound in leather too old to still be intact, blackened with mold and moisture. He said he found it floating, bobbing near the edge where the reeds thinned. He handed it to me without a word. I opened it. Inside were names, pages and pages of names, not just written, carved, burned into the parchment. Some were familiar. Some I hadn't heard in years. Some hadn't been spoken aloud in generations. But near the end, scrawled in ink so fresh it bled onto my fingertips, were 2 final entries. Mine and Henry's. No last name, just first names. Like it didn't matter who we were, only that we had been counted. I closed the book and asked him if he remembered who gave it to him. He nodded. The woman, he said. She said it's not hers anymore. It's ours now. I tried to burn it. The pages wouldn't catch, not even when soaked in gasoline. I buried it instead. But part of me knows it won't stay buried, because the next morning the rope was at the foot of my bed, wet again, still warm. The morning after I buried the book, I found the rope at the foot of my bed. At first I thought I must have dreamed it. It had to be a trick of the light, or perhaps the lingering weight of my own fear, stretching my mind in ways that didn't quite align with reality. But the moment I reached down to touch it, I knew it was real. I don't know why I picked it up. Maybe it was because of the strange warmth that seemed to radiate from it, or the fact that its familiar coiled shape felt like it belonged to me, in a way I couldn't explain. I wasn't even sure how it had arrived there, whether it had simply appeared during the night, or if I had brought it in myself in some half-conscious stupor, unaware of my own actions. I stared at it, unwilling to let go, and then, against my better judgment, I picked it up and walked to the back door. The marsh had been silent that day. No fog, no rustling, no heavy air pressing down on the house. But as I stood there, the air grew heavier. The atmosphere around me seemed to shift, as though something unseen was drawing closer, waiting. The rope didn't want to stay in my hands. It was as though it had a life of its own, slowly unwinding like a snake. I tried to stop it, but the more I fought it, the more it twisted, pulling me toward the edge of the marsh. Henry was still inside, sitting quietly at the kitchen table, staring out the window with an expression I couldn't quite place. I was too far gone to think about him, too fixated on the task I had set in motion, driven by something far beyond my control. The rope tugged at me relentlessly, and then, just as I reached the water's edge, I saw it. The church. It stood in the distance, half hidden by the fog that had now returned, curling around its broken steeple like the fingers of a ghost. The door was open, the bell tower empty. The church was waiting. I had no doubt in my mind that it had always been there, hidden just out of view, waiting for me to remember. It had always been there, watching me, even before I had set foot in this place. I stood there for a long time, watching the mist swirl and shift until my legs grew numb and my hands trembled with the weight of the rope. It seemed to pulse with every breath I took, like a heart that didn't belong to me. I felt the presence behind me before I heard it. A soft whispering, like voices carried on the wind. Low, guttural murmurs that made my blood run cold. I turned, and there she was. The woman from the photo. She was standing there, closer than I'd ever seen her before. Her face was still a blur, but her eyes, they were so clear, so cold, so full of silent knowing. The silence between us stretched for what felt like an eternity. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. The rope seemed to be tightening in my hands, pulling me toward her, as if it knew something I didn't. And then, as if the fog had parted, just for her, I saw something else. Another figure, just beyond the edge of the trees. His outline was barely visible, but I knew who he was the moment I saw him. The man with the lantern. I didn't see his face, but I didn't need to. I knew his shape. I knew the way his shoulders bent slightly, as though weighed down by some unbearable burden. And I knew that, just like the woman, he was waiting for me to act. Something stirred inside me, a memory, a feeling. I was meant to be here. This was my place. This was my reckoning. The woman didn't speak. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes told me everything. She was waiting. We were all waiting. Without thinking, I stepped forward toward the church. The woman didn't stop me. Neither did the man with the lantern. They simply watched as I walked toward the mist and the waiting door. With every step, the air grew colder, heavier. The earth beneath my feet seemed to tremble, as if it too was alive with some dark pulse. I reached the door and pushed it open. The hinges creaked in protest, but it gave way, revealing nothing but darkness inside. I stepped across the threshold. The moment my foot crossed the line between the outside world and the church's interior, I felt it. A deep, bone-shaking chill that spread through my body. It wasn't cold, not in the way you'd expect. It was as if the warmth of my body was being slowly drained, leaving only a hollow shell behind. The air inside the church was thick, heavy with the scent of old wood, damp earth, and something far less identifiable. Something rotten, something ancient. I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of me, the darkness so thick it swallowed the light of the lantern outside. But I could feel the presence. It was there, moving with me. I stood in the doorway for a long time, listening to the silence that enveloped me. The bell didn't ring. The air didn't stir. The only sound was my breathing, shallow and uneven, and the beating of my own heart in my chest. Then, a voice broke the stillness. It wasn't a sound I heard, but something that rippled through me like a whisper in my soul. "You're here." I froze, my heart skipping a beat. The voice, low, cracked, like it had been buried for centuries, came from somewhere within the church. It wasn't the woman. It wasn't the man with the lantern. It was something older, something darker, and it knew me. I wanted to run. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't move. I couldn't escape the weight of the words. I had crossed the threshold, and now I was part of it. I was part of the church, part of the ritual. There was no going back. The rope was still in my hands, its weight increasing by the second. And when I looked down at it, I saw something that wasn't there before. A name. My name. Written in the same ancient curling script I had seen on the pages of the book Henry found. The same script that had burned its way into my memory. The same one that now marked me as one of them. The rope tightened, pulling me deeper into the darkness. And I understood. This wasn't just a house. It wasn't just a marsh. This was the beginning, and I was the end. I felt a sharp tug at my chest, like the pull of the rope was drawing something from deep within me, something I didn't know I was capable of giving. The darkness inside the church was not just empty space. It was alive, breathing, wrapping itself around me with each passing second. The name on the rope burned into my skin. I could feel it, the letters twisting and growing like they were written in fire. My hand gripped it tighter, and the air around me grew colder, more oppressive. The smell of damp earth and rot thickened, and I could almost hear something else. Beneath the silence, there was a low rhythmic sound, like chanting, like voices calling to me from deep below. I dared to take a step further into the church. The heavy wooden door behind me slammed shut with an unnatural force, shaking the entire structure. The room was now completely engulfed in darkness. I couldn't see a single thing. I couldn't even hear my own breathing anymore, just the deep pulse in the pit of my stomach that told me something was waiting. Something ancient. Something not entirely human. Yet still me. I couldn't move. I didn't want to. The floor beneath my feet groaned as though the building itself was alive, and in that moment I realized with a terrifying certainty that I wasn't the first to be here. I would not be the last. And yet, a strange calm washed over me, as though I'd known all along that this was where I belonged, that this church, buried in the heart of the marsh, was a place of reckoning. My reckoning. I wasn't the first soul to enter here, but I might very well be the last. It was a memory I had yet to unlock, a shadow in the recesses of my mind, something distant, like a dream I couldn't fully grasp. A story that had been told to me long ago, only half remembered, drifting just outside the reach of logic. Yet here it was, pressing against the edges of my consciousness. And now I could feel its weight. There was a creak, a subtle shift in the darkness, and I was not alone. A shape materialized before me, not in the way a person might appear from light, but in the slow, deliberate unfurling of something hidden. I couldn't make it out at first. Just a silhouette against the abyss. But then through the fog of my fear, I saw him, the Lantern Man. His figure was tall, impossibly tall, his shape covered in tattered robes that seemed to flicker like flames in the pitch-black dark. He held the lantern, its light casting an eerie glow that didn't illuminate the space but seemed to reveal a deeper layer of the dark, the kind of dark that draws something closer, something that shouldn't be seen. His face was hidden, shrouded beneath the wide brim of his hood, but I could feel his presence, a weight pressing against me. The lantern flickered again, casting shadows that danced wildly along the edges of the church. I could see the wooden pews now, rows of them lined up, their surfaces coated with dust and a layer of age. The stone floor was cracked and worn, but still held the imprint of countless footsteps, many of which I realized hadn't left. The Lantern Man didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. I could feel the rope growing tighter, heavier in my hands. It pulsed with an intensity that matched the silent rhythm of the room. The darkness inside me stirred, pushing and pulling, drawing me toward the altar at the far end of the church. I took a step forward, unable to resist, and then the air around me shifted, thickened with something else. Voices. At first, I couldn't tell if they were whispers or screams. They wrapped themselves around my thoughts like a fog, twisting and turning, echoing off the walls of the church. But as I stepped forward, the words became clearer. The voices weren't just speaking, they were calling to me. It was my name they were chanting. Daniel, Daniel, Daniel. The chanting grew louder with every step, pulling at the very fibers of my soul. The lantern's dim light flickered again, casting harsh shadows against the walls. And in the darkness, I saw something shift, something large. Something alive was rising from the altar. I stopped. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. The rope in my hands was now a tether to something far older than me, something that demanded my presence, my surrender. I was no longer in control. The figure at the altar was immense. It was barely visible at first, but as it rose, the shape became clearer. A towering silhouette cloaked in shadow, stretching to the ceiling, its form shuddering as if it were being born from the very walls. The chanting became a low hum now, vibrating through the air, merging with the whispers that wrapped around my head. The figure's presence was suffocating. And then, its eyes. Two glowing embers of red, faint at first, but growing brighter with every passing second. It turned toward me. The figure's voice came deep and guttural, like the very foundation of the church was speaking. "You are mine now." I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. The rope in my hand seemed to stretch, as if it was pulling me toward the altar, toward the figure that had risen from the very darkness. The lantern man stood motionless, still holding his lantern, but I knew he was watching, waiting. He had seen this before. I had seen this before. The figure's words echoed in my mind, even as the world seemed to bend and twist around me. "You were always meant to come. You were always meant to find the way." The air was thick, suffocating, and with every beat of my heart, I felt the force drawing me in. The figure's eyes burned with an ancient hunger, its form becoming clearer as the shadows warped around it. And then, like a surge of realization, it hit me. This was no accident. The book, the rope, the lantern, it was all fated. Every decision I had made, every turn I had taken, had led me to this moment. I was not just here to witness it. I was here to become it. The altar, the church, the marsh, it was all part of me now. It had always been a part of me. I had returned. I could hear the chanting again, louder now, but not from the walls. It was inside me. The voices had merged with my own thoughts. Daniel. Daniel. The figure spoke again. "Now, you will join us." I took one step forward. The air in the church was suffocating now, pressing down on me with every breath. My lungs burned, and the weight of it all, everything seemed to settle on my chest, making each movement feel like a struggle. The rope in my hands, once an object of mystery and dread, was now an extension of myself. I could feel it, pulling me forward, urging me to join the towering figure at the altar. The lantern man did not move, his lantern still casting that faint, flickering glow, but he was watching. His stillness was unnerving. He didn't need to speak. His presence was enough. But it wasn't just his presence that made me freeze in place. It was the altar, the ancient weathered stone structure that sat just beyond him. It looked more like a grave than an altar. The figure standing before it now, the one with burning eyes and the body of shadows, was beckoning me. No words, no gestures, just the presence, heavy and suffocating, drawing me closer. I took another step, but my feet felt as though they were sinking into the stone floor. I tried to move faster to get away, but something invisible held me in place. I couldn't even scream. The air had thickened to the point where sound itself was being smothered. The only noise was the rhythmic beating of my heart, loud and insistent, echoing in my ears. Then the figure's voice came again. "You've come far, Daniel, but this is where the journey ends and begins." It was as if the words themselves carved through the silence, and my body responded to them unwillingly, as though they were a command. My hands tightened around the rope, and I felt the pull once more. This time, it wasn't just a suggestion. It was a force that couldn't be denied. I moved again, slowly, deliberately, as though my legs had forgotten how to do anything but obey. With each step, I felt a change. The walls of the church seemed to close in, the shadows twisting and shifting, the air growing colder, thicker. There was a strange sense of déjà vu in the back of my mind, like I had lived this moment before, countless times. But it was too late to pull back now. I reached the altar. The figure's eyes burned brighter, and I realized something terrifying. The figure wasn't just looking at me. It was looking through me, into me. "You are the last," the voice said, a low rumble that vibrated through my bones. "The last to carry the flame, to bring the bell back." The rope in my hands tightened painfully, and I was forced to my knees in front of the altar, the stone cutting into my skin as I knelt there. My head swam. The world felt like it was spinning out of control, but still, I couldn't pull away. You have always belonged here, Daniel." The words were not just spoken. They were inside me now, inside my mind. my thoughts. You were chosen long ago, but you have forgotten. The bell, the rope, the lantern. It is all connected, Daniel. It is your destiny. The shadows around the figure seemed to stretch and grow, and I was suddenly aware of their movement, like they were alive, coiling around me, enveloping me. I couldn't see where they ended. I couldn't see the floor or the walls. It was just the figure, the altar, and me. The lantern man was still standing motionless in the corner, his lantern casting that same faint, eerie glow, but his presence felt distant now, unimportant, overshadowed by the towering figure before me. Something cold and sharp pressed against my back. I twisted, expecting to see something behind me, but there was nothing, just shadows. Then the altar seemed to shift. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the stone began to move. I could hear the scrape of ancient rock against ancient rock as something beneath it shifted. A low groan filled the room, reverberating off the walls. It was as if the very church was coming to life. Breathing, groaning, shifting. It is time, Daniel. The figure's voice came again, this time accompanied by a deep rumble like a low growl. The shadowy figure took a step forward, and its massive, dark form seemed to loom over me. I could see its face now, or at least what I thought was its face. It wasn't human. There were too many features, too many eyes, and its expression was one of ancient, unfathomable hunger. You are the one who must ring the bell. You are the one who must end the silence. And just like that, I understood. The bell, the silence, the waiting, the pull of the rope. It all made sense now, but it didn't make it any less terrifying. The rope in my hands, still wound tightly, began to burn. Not in the physical sense, but in a way that made my skin crawl. It felt like something was trying to break free from it, like something was waking up. Suddenly the lantern flickered once more, brighter than ever. And then, without warning, the altar split open. The ground beneath me cracked, the stone breaking apart, and I was thrown backward, landing hard on the floor. The rope slipped from my hands. The world spun in a whirl of darkness and light, and then I saw it, a vision, an image that seemed to stretch across time and space. A bell, a massive ancient bell, its metal tarnished and worn. But it wasn't just the bell. There was something inside it, something alive. It wasn't the shape of a person or a creature, but it felt like it. It had the presence of something that should never have been, something wrong and twisted. The bell tolled once, deep and thunderous, shaking the foundations of the church. The sound was unlike anything I had ever heard. It was like the ringing of a bell that had been forgotten, abandoned in some other time, some other world. And as the bell tolled again, I felt the cold rush of realization. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The toll of the bell echoed through my skull, reverberating with a force that rattled my very bones. It wasn't just sound. It was something deeper, something that gnawed at my consciousness, burrowing its way into the very fabric of my mind. I could feel it, that ancient presence, clawing its way out from the depths of the bell like something that had been asleep for far too long. And then I heard it, a whisper, barely audible, as if it were coming from the very air around me. It wasn't just a sound, it was a voice. The voice was everywhere, swirling around me, inside me, making the walls bend and sway with each word. You were always meant to hear it, Daniel, to wake it, to become it. My heart pounded in my chest as I lay there on the cold stone floor, struggling to breathe, the weight of the words crushing me. I wanted to move, to run, to do anything but be here, in this place where the air felt thick and alive, pulsating with a malevolent energy I couldn't escape. But my body wouldn't respond. I couldn't even lift my arms. All I could do was listen to that endless, creeping whisper. The ground beneath me began to tremble. I felt it in the pit of my stomach, like a great, unseen force was gathering beneath the earth, drawing closer, inch by agonizing inch. The shadows that had enveloped the church were no longer still. They began to shift and writhe as though they were coming alive, reaching for me. I could see them now. Faces, eyes, limbs, emerging from the darkness, their shapes contorting, their mouths opening wide in silent screams. I wanted to scream too, to shout, to demand answers, but all I could do was lie there, paralyzed. The darkness around me grew thicker, deeper, and the shadows were no longer just creeping, they were consuming, swallowing everything in their path. My mind, my body, everything was being devoured by it. And then the figure at the altar spoke again. It is too late now. I tried to focus, tried to pull myself back to reality, but the words, the presence, the bell, they were all consuming me, tearing through the thin veil of logic that remained in my mind. I could feel my very sense of self slipping away. The man with the lantern was still standing there, his face hidden in shadow, his form towering over the altar like a sentinel. He said nothing now. He didn't need to. The church, the bell, the shadows, they were speaking for him. You were never meant to leave, Daniel. You were meant to stay. With those words, everything stopped. The movement of the shadows ceased. The trembling of the ground stopped. The sound of the bell, which had been pounding relentlessly, vanished into silence. I opened my eyes. The altar was gone. The church was gone. I was lying on the floor of my home again, back in the farmhouse, back in the place where it had all started. The silence in the room was absolute. The dim light of the evening filtered through the window, casting long shadows across the room. Everything was as it should be. The room was cold, but that was nothing new. I could hear the wind outside, rustling the tall grass in the field. I was home. I sat up slowly, my body stiff, my muscles aching as though I had been lying still for days. My mind raced. The vision, the altar, the bell, the figure in the church. It had felt so real. It had felt like I had been pulled into another world entirely. Had it all been a dream? Had I just imagined it? But the weight of the rope in my hand told me otherwise. I looked down, my breath catching in my throat. There, lying across my lap, was the rope. It was the same rope from the church, the same thick, frayed cord that had burned my hands in the vision. And, as if it were waiting for me to notice, I saw it. The bell, the one that had tolled in the church, was hanging there in front of me. It wasn't a physical bell, not in the traditional sense, but its presence was undeniable. The shadow of it loomed in my mind, a looming, oppressive weight that seemed to hang in the very air around me. It was real. The bell was real. The vision, the church. It hadn't been a dream. It was something more. And now I was part of it. I stood up, the rope still in my hands, the lantern, the altar, the bell. The words of the figure at the altar echoed in my ears, repeating over and over. You were always meant to hear it. You were always meant to wake it. There was no escape. Not anymore. I walked to the window, my body moving on its own, as though my feet had become separate from my mind. The field outside stretched out before me, the tall grass swaying gently in the evening breeze. And I knew that something was waiting for me out there. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faintest sound, the distant muffled ringing of a bell. It was calling me, and no matter how hard I tried to resist, I knew I had to answer. I took a step towards the door, still holding the rope in my hand. The wind outside was beginning to howl, as if it could feel the weight of what was about to happen. The bell continued to toll, faintly at first, but steadily growing louder, as though it were calling me. It wasn't a bell in the traditional sense anymore. There was no metal, no ringing sound. It was a force, a vibration deep in my bones, pulling me toward it. The rope felt warm against my palm, as though it were alive, connected to something far beyond my understanding. I stepped out into the cold night air, the tall grass brushing against my legs as I walked toward the field. Every step felt deliberate, like the earth beneath me was guiding me, like I was following a path I didn't remember choosing, but one I knew I had to walk. My mind swirled with fragments of memories, pieces of images, words, and feelings I couldn't fully grasp. Faces of people who had never existed, places I'd never been, and the presence of something ancient and vast, pulling at the very fabric of my reality. As I walked further into the field, the light of the moon bathed the landscape in an eerie glow. The wind was relentless now, howling through the grass, carrying with it an ominous sense of urgency. I couldn't ignore it. The bell was closer now, its sound vibrating in my chest. It was as if the earth itself was shaking beneath me, urging me to hurry. I reached the spot in the field where the depression had been. The ground had changed. The sunken shape I had discovered before was deeper now, more pronounced. It wasn't just a hole in the earth, it was a wound, a gaping opening that seemed to pulse with life. The edges of the depression were lined with shadows, thick and oppressive, as though something was trying to break free from beneath the ground. The rope in my hand burned hotter, its presence becoming unbearable. I could hear the faintest whispers in the wind, like voices calling out, calling me. I dropped to my knees, my hands trembling as I placed the rope into the earth. As soon as I did, the ground rumbled beneath me, a deep guttural sound like the groan of an ancient beast awakening. The bell tolled again, this time so loud that it felt as though it was inside my head, ringing with a force that threatened to crack open my skull. The shadows around me began to shift. They were no longer just silhouettes in the dark. They were growing, stretching, becoming solid. Figures began to emerge from the darkness, their forms twisted and grotesque, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. They were the same figures from the church, the ones I had seen standing in the darkness, staring at me with their empty, burlap-covered faces. But now, they were no longer just shadows. They were real. They were coming for me. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen in place, my body refusing to obey as the figures approached. They circled me, their faces hidden in the folds of burlap, but I could feel their eyes on me. The air grew thick, suffocating, and I could barely breathe. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat a drum of fear that matched the rhythm of the bell. And then I heard it. The voice. The same one from before. The one that had whispered to me in the church. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a command. "You are mine now, Daniel." I closed my eyes, trying to block it out, but the voice was everywhere. Inside my head. Inside my soul. I could feel it sinking into my skin, into my blood, wrapping around me like chains. It was too much. I couldn't fight it. I had tried, but it was pointless. I had been chosen. There was no escaping it. The shadows were upon me now, their hands, no, their arms, reaching for me, their fingers twisted and gnarled like branches from some ancient, cursed tree. They pulled me toward the hole in the ground, and I could feel the earth beneath me give way as if it were swallowing me whole. The bell tolled one last time, the sound a terrible, mournful cry as I was dragged into the darkness. I fell. And then, silence. I woke up, but it wasn't the same. Nothing was the same. The house was gone. The field was gone. I was no longer in the farmhouse. I was in a place that felt older than time, a place where the air was thick with decay and the shadows stretched forever. It was a ruin. A crumbling church, its walls broken and its roof caved in, was all that remained of the place I had once known. I stood there, disoriented, my hands still gripping the rope. The bell had stopped tolling, but the shadows, those things, remained. They were everywhere, surrounding me, watching me with their empty eyes, and I knew. I had become them. I was one of them now, bound to the bell, bound to the darkness, bound to the land that had claimed me. There was no going back. The Lantern Man had been waiting for me all along, waiting for me to answer the call, to wake the bell, to awaken the ancient force that slumbered beneath the earth. And now, there was no escaping it. I was trapped in the church, in the marsh, in the land of shadows. The figures were no longer just in my mind. They were real, and they would never leave me. The bell had tolled, and it was time to answer. And now, I was the Lantern Man. Thank you for listening to The Night Reader. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt lost in the dark, remember, you're not alone. The stories we carry are what connect us. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment letting me know, where are you listening from, and what story do you carry? Until next time, keep your light close and your shadows closer.